So NIO is sacrificing billions in order to earn trillions. And this has everything to do with the B2B taxis. All right. This is very important because if you look at all the cities, all right, pretty much every single city, the taxis are new energy vehicles. In Beijing, it's BAIC, and they can actually do battery swap, and you've seen in my previous videos. And here in Tianjin, which I'm at currently, they're either BYD or Geely. All right, so they got these cheap EVs that are basically taxis here in Tianjin. Now, why does NIO have to sacrifice billions? Well, here's something to think about. When it was announced that Envo was going to share swap stations with NIO, a lot of NIO owners were worried that they have to fight in line with an Envo car. All right, and this was one of their very big concerns because, battery swap lineups, that's something that we all want to avoid. And if you have longer lineups, that's something that really isn't that good of an experience, right? So people prefer that Envo doesn't have access to NIO swap stations. That's what NIO owners want. And on the flip side, if taxis were also able to use NIO's swap stations, that will completely devalue the battery swapping experience. If you have to line up with taxi cars, it makes battery swapping, those NIO swap stations, look really low. Not high end at all. It's going to be like a low end. You're fighting for swaps with taxis. That's a very bad thing, and you want to avoid that. So of course, what are they doing? Well, we know for a fact that they're going to be building swap stations for Firefly, their own swap stations. These are smaller size swap stations that will have smaller batteries. Also because the smaller batteries, the smaller size of the Firefly cars will not be able to swap at a NIO swap station. It's like basically the gate is too wide, all right? And then the wheels, the car is too narrow. If a Firefly car were to go into a NIO swap station, it would just fall in. All right, it would fall in the swap station. All right, I'm just sort of making an exaggeration, but you get the point. All right, so it needs its own swap station, which will cost billions. Of course, they got to lay out the infrastructure. But of course, because the Firefly brand is like 100K-ish, 100K, 200K-ish, that is around the price that taxis are at. All right, for example, the taxis in Beijing, they're around 130,000 RMB. So a Firefly car is going to be around that same price. So it really makes sense that with Firefly swap stations, those smaller swap stations, that when you have that swapping alliance, all right, you're going to have a lot of taxi companies and even Didi, which is like Uber cars, join in on that swapping alliance. All right, so you got more premium cars that use the NIO swapping stations, all right, with the Envo battery pack, and then you got the cheaper cars use the smaller battery pack with the Firefly swap stations, which are much smaller, and that will probably be able to swap much faster, and also each swap station will probably hold many more batteries because of the smaller size, and it just makes sense. And it doesn't devalue the experience of a NIO swap station. NIO swaps, NIO owners don't have to fight for swaps with taxis because they're swapping at a different station, all right? And that really, really makes sense. And this is where there's going to be that big opportunity. And it's already being validated in Beijing, right? All the taxi cars in Beijing can do battery swap, all right? That's how crazy it is. All of them can do battery swap, all right? And it's just whether or not you want to do it, all right? But eventually, as time goes on, you're going to have to progress. You're going to have to replace these cars. What are you going to replace them with? Maybe 3-4 years down the line, right? 3-4 years down the line, when these cars get too old, you're going to replace them with potentially a car, a NIO Firefly car maybe, all right? Or maybe a Firefly swap partnership car that can swap at Firefly swap stations. So this is where the $1 trillion opportunity is. One thing we do have to admit is that the swap stations, the current NIO swap stations, isn't one size fits all. All right, we have to admit that. All right, the battery packs are slightly bigger. All right, you have to have a slightly bigger car, and if you have any small cars, that would be a physical limitation. And also, it wouldn't make sense to have that many different batteries inside a swap station either. So it would make sense to have its own individual swap station. I understand to the dismay of investors. Investors are like, what the hell? You're going to have to spend billions again to build out swap stations? It already cost you so much money. You already spent billions building out the existing swap network, but you can't use that with the Firefly? Listen, it's all going to be worth it in the end. All right, it's all going to be worth it in the end. NIO is going to have the firm grasp of the entire battery swapping network. Okay, but that is one of the key points, because you see with the battery swap that's happening right now, which are powered by Alton for the BAIC cars, the taxis here in Beijing, those are very rudimentary. All right, they're not the kind of old-fashioned battery swaps, and they really do need to get improved, and eventually they'll be phased out. Right? Eventually, you're going to have, and also not just in Beijing, but all the cities in China will need cars, taxis that can do battery swap. But it just simply does not make sense for them to swap at NIO swap stations for taxis. So they just really, really, really need to spend these billions of dollars. And then once that happens, you got the swap station out, the Firefly swap stations, then you get those big, damn massive orders, all right, for these taxi cars. That's where like NIO's gonna earn a ton of money, all right, because you're selling bulk. You're not selling just a few hundred cars. You're selling like a few thousand or tens of thousands of cars, and in all the cities combined, that's gonna be incredible, right? And then not just that, but also for Uber cars, like Uber cars, DD cars here in China, So the potential is very, very high. I've talked to a lot of these cabs here in China, all right? One of their biggest fears is charging, because charging takes so long, and you gotta charge at night where it's very late, and it's just so inconvenient, and sometimes you don't have the range to get the job done, and that's just a big pain in the butt. You got to do an order that's like 30 kilometers, but you only have like 20 kilometers of range, then you're screwed. All right. So there is really a need for battery swap for the cheap level. All right. That's not going to be in conflict with NIO's premiumness. All right. Don't want to dilute and devalue the NIO swapping experience. So it's a must. They have to do it. There's no other way. That billions of dollars may have well be already spent, and very soon we could see, well, of course, they've already signed all these partnerships, right? So they're working on it. And we'll just have to see what they come out with, all right?